What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again, and this time we are here with Shane of the Almighty Wayfarer. It is so great to have you here. Thanks for coming on the show today, man.
Much appreciated, man. Glad to be here. Good to talk to you guys again.
Yeah, it's great to be able to have you back here. The new album, American Gothic, is absolutely kick-ass. Is this just sort of like a continuation of a romance with violence, or was this meant to sort of signify like a new beginning for Wayfarer?
I guess a bit of both. It's definitely being viewed as its own kind of chapter and its own step forward for the band. But in terms of where it's coming from conceptually, it does pick up where the other one left off, and then definitely kind of pursues that as a whole direction instead of a continuation, if that makes sense. A lot of the last record is kind of about the idea of the American West and the interpretation of it and how it's been mythologized and built into this legend and romanticized, as is in the title. But it's kind of like a deconstruction of it, and by the end of it, it's literally asking the question like, where is the dream? Where is this thing? And so American Gothic picks up from that note, from the drop of that the dream is dead, and this is the funeral for the American dream, and this is like, um, you know what's left over in the wake of that. So it's definitely a darker record, and it explores its own sounds, but there is a connecting line for sure.
Do you feel like your albums are meant to be listened to in a chronological way? Like if somebody could just be discovering Wayfarer now, they should maybe listen to the previous albums? Should they maybe start with the Children of the Iron Age, move on to Old Souls, World's Blood, Romance of Violence, and then move on to this?
That's a good question. I think that's the great thing about music is everyone finds things their own way, everyone interprets things their own way. So I definitely don't think there's a right or wrong way to do anything. I'm definitely like a total nerd, and anytime I'm like into something, I have to like kind of obsess about it, and maybe like I probably would do that with the things that I'm into. But I don't think it's not like it's directly a story that you need to know what happened in this one to get this out of this one. But if you want to see the progression of the band, there's those first two early records, which I think are definitely indicative of like a band figuring out who we are. And I think the kind of lineage of where it's at now really starts with World's Blood. So that would be kind of like the trilogy of like the real American West stuff would be World's Blood, Romance, and this one. But like I said, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do anything. Like it's music. It's meant to be enjoyed as its own thing. And if you want to dive deep and get the full picture, you can. Or if you want to just listen to the one thing, that's cool too.
And you mentioned too that this album is darker, and I could definitely tell that it's darker just by the first single you released, "False Constellation." But I think it's fair to assume that the cattle thief and reaper of the old fields and to enter my house, Justified, is like all continuing in that same vein of darkness. Was that a vision that you went into the making of this album with, or was there any sort of like experimentation or improv where it just sort of like turned out that way?
Yeah, I mean, there's always some degree of experimentation and improv. I think there has to be for it to be, organic and interesting. But we're definitely the type of band that like we go in from the jump when we're making a new record, really making anything, but especially a new record, of like being like, this is what we want to get across with this, both musically, sonically, as well as, what it's about, what it's kind of depicting. So definitely, we went in kind of knowing the tone of album we wanted to make, the sort of like sounds we wanted to carve out more specifically this time, and how we wanted it to feel. And yeah, I think once you dive into that, you have to leave some room to let things happen organically. So there was a bit of that as well, because that's what I think a lot of the most interesting things come from. But the framework was set for the beginning. We knew kind of the picture we wanted to paint, and how we wanted to do it, like what elements we wanted to really flesh out the most this time.
See, I never like to ask the type of questions like, what are your influences? Because A, it's so
Sure.
cliche. And I think even asking you in particular about that, I listen to your music. I see elements of doom. I see elements of, stoner rock, whatever that means. Like, the review one person said, actually, and it kind of makes a lot of sense. They said you guys are very much like a Saint Vitus band. And, like, they mentioned bands like Pallbearer, Baroness, Primitive Man. like along those kind of lines in a way. The sort of gothic inspiration that's beyond this, that's within this though, like I again, it's fair to say that there's many different sources of inspiration, internal and external, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's actually interesting. Like, I think all of us have some degree of appreciation for doom metal and yeah, bands like Saint Vitus, but we don't really think in that vein in making the music at all. So that's kind of like what I was going back to before, where it's like it's all so up to the listener. Like, we don't really consider that an influence or like where we're coming from, but like I guess I could kind of see where it would tie in, and that's kind of an interesting thing. But if you're looking for what fed into this one, especially the more kind of gothic elements, like the root of it is always for us the Denver sound, kind of gothic country, dark Americana stuff. That's where we come from in terms of like being a Western band. We try not to like do any of the kind of gimmicky tropes of just dropping in like Ennio Morricone soundtrack stuff or whatever. Like we want it to sound like Western music and Colorado music. And those bands, as well as us, also just have a healthy appreciation and influence of a lot of your kind of 80s post-punk stuff. So, there is a big influence of Fields of the Nephilim. There is a big influence of Susie and the Banshees and stuff like that. Just because it's great songwriting. It's like, finds a way to be like earwormy enough to stick with you, but it's still like haunting and interesting. And I definitely gravitate on the spectrum of those sorts of gothic post-punky sort of things. I find myself gravitating to the bands that are more of a rock band at their core. I like your kind of electro, new wavy sort of goth music as well, but the stuff that really gets me are bands like Fields of the Nephilim, that it's like still a guitar driven, rock band at its core.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of influence from things like that.
I mean, upon listening to you for the first time, I said this band is either from Denver or they're from Portland. That was one of the two places I was gonna guess in a way, because you definitely, I would say that you all play an inspiration on each other within your own scene, from Primitive Man to Spectral Voice and the Company of Serpents, Bleak Heart. I believe Dreadnought is from there as well. So like there's like a whole sort of like scene in Colorado that really like I just call this genre Denver metal.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of stuff coming from here, and what I enjoy about it is it is so different. Like all the bands you just named, like hit so many different places on like a metal and musical spectrum, and that's what's cool. Is like, yeah, there probably is. It's hard for me to say because I've always been here. I know all these people, but there probably is from the outside like a through line one can draw listening to it all. But I enjoy that there's so many bands from here that are doing things that are so different. Like if you look at Dreadnought and then Blood Incantation and then Primitive Man and then whatever, it's like, you're really covering so many different approaches to music and types of sound. But yeah, it's a very, very connected scene. Everybody plays in each other's bands. We're all like in too many bands with one another, and it's a cool place. We share a practice space. Like there's the bands that myself, Isaac, and James play in, which is Wayfarer, Like Out of Non Stormkeep, and in our practice room is also Dreadnought and Bleak Heart. It's like it's a very connected place.
Yeah, I love that last Bleak Heart record. It's just so beautiful. I can't get enough of that album. Shout out to Bleak Heart.
They're awesome, man.
Yeah, that was.
Wait till you hear the next one. It is coming.
Oh, I cannot wait, and I will be having them on the show then very shortly. To their publicist, I will be reaching out. But when it comes to the concept in this sort of trilogy that's expressed throughout Wayfarer, is a lot of your personal life or your own personal experiences kind of utilized in here, or do you use Wayfarer as more of an escapism from your daily life?
I would say it ends up being a bit of both. Like it's definitely, pretty broad stroked, like bigger concept stuff. Generally speaking, so like, we aren't generally going to like write a song being like, oh, I want to tell this very personal story about, something I've experienced or felt. But naturally in making music and then in writing lyrics, like it will come through because, we also don't like to just like be a historical retelling of events or something. Like it has to come from some kind of human perspective. And it's often oftentimes it'll be more kind of like how we might relate to whatever it is the song is kind of talking about lyrically. So I think, the personal things find their way in because, I mean, at the end of the day, man, music has to be personal. That's why we connect to it, and I think there's ways to do it without being obvious. So like being like, oh, I'm heartbroken, I'm gonna write a song about it. It's like you can be writing a song about the fucking Dust Bowl in the 1930s, which you didn't live through, but like relate to, or be attempting to relate to and understand via your own experience, maybe like what something like that feels like to experience, for example.
Absolutely, because like people, I've always wondered that too, because there's a very famous saying that every painting is a self-portrait. But if you're writing, like, Sabaton, for example, they write about World War One, and not to assume their
Mm-hmm.
age, but I doubt that they were around during World War One.
Yeah.
So like, I've always found that like unique in a way, because I think it's very important to sing about like historical references and elements of
Sure.
history and all that. But part of me also feels a little, I don't know. I don't know what the right word is, but like I didn't experience that. So therefore, like, is the words that I am saying really the best representation of that event? You know what I mean? Like, I'll put it to you example. Who's a better person to tell you about September 11th? A person who survived that tower, a person who escaped from that burning building,
Mhm.
or somebody who just wrote about it, maybe analyzed it from a TV screen and didn't really go there. You know what I mean? So,
No, 100%. And that's something that we definitely do try to specifically be mindful of, where it's like we're exploring these concepts, but we never profess to have any answers, like this is just an interpretation and like kind of a perspective on something that is not meant to be taken too literally. It's just like this is our expression of it. You can do with that what you will, including see it and be like, fuck that, I disagree with that.
yeah.
So no, I think that's nail on the head. And it's important to be conscious of things like that. Like for example, I mean, we did the World's Blood album is kind of circled around the concept of like a haunted nation, just based on, the genocide that took place in the formation of the United States. But that was one that we made sure to be very careful of. Like we can't speak for anyone. It's like we were not the people, even generations down the line aren't the people who were the most directly affected by something like this. So we're not trying to speak for them. We're just exploring this album from the perspective of being born here and trying to, reckon with and reconcile kind of the dark past of the nation. But I think it is like you're saying about the September 11th thing. It's like it's always important to like make sure you're not acting like you know what everything is, especially when you haven't experienced something, and allowing those who might have actual perspective on something the space to express it.
Yeah, and also too, because like with the being that with World's Blood and A Romance of the Violence and American Gothic being part of a trilogy, but Old Souls and Children of the Iron Age maybe sort of take them back to something different, depending on what you're singing about or playing to, whether it would be more personal or more historical reference or whatnot. Do you feel like you channel a different energy or a different persona into it, or in the end, when you're playing that material, it doesn't really matter what it's about? It's still you playing it, and therefore the energy is pretty much the same.
Yeah. I think again it's maybe a bit of both, where there is a bit of like kind of maybe getting into characters the wrong word, but like, getting into the headspace of the material that you're doing, to really try to like live it as much as possible to create something in there. But at the same time, it's not a complete, can't be a complete like fabrication, like, oh, I'm going to like dive into this pretend universe and like, divorce myself from my own reality and thoughts, because again, it does have to be genuine at the same time. So you have to keep that like personal aspect intact, where you can kind of express something genuinely within a headspace that you're looking to explore with something. So it's a bit of both for sure.
And like, is there almost like a lot of research? Are you looking at, literature or film or visual art as a means of like as a means of inspiration, or is it also very much, because I feel like your music like really does hit hard in a way and kind of goes right into it? Is your music almost kind of like an emotional reaction in a way, or maybe like a commentary?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of research for sure. Film specifically, like obviously, there's a ton of musical influences on the band, but film specifically with Wayfarer is a big part of it. I think again, the previous record, Romance and Violence, was like so much about the interpretation and depiction that we really dove into film, especially kind of like from other places, like all of your Italian-made westerns. How it's like this whole like kind of mythology that's being created about the United States between X and X year, by people in Italy in the 60s, and it's like really interesting to see like other interpretations and how something becomes like kind of a legend by people building it into one. And then this album specifically, because it's so focused on the idea of the nation itself and this like funeral for the American dream aspect, we did kind of much more immersion in film that was American made about the country, and definitely kind of the darker ones, going away from the kind of 40s 50s like black and white morality tale westerns, and going to like the late 60s 70s very deconstructive, very like darker takes on US history and the West in particular. So yeah, there is a lot of research and influence from things like that, as well as actual historical research, and some literature involved there, like the Cattle Thief is a song purely about the Johnson County War in Wyoming, and that one was actually fully researched, and maybe the first time we've ever written a song about one specific historical event and really dove into that. But there is also some degree of just like, okay, we've taken in all of this. This is the reaction, as you say, like the outpouring in response, because we're not here to like retell it to you, because you can go read about this or watch this movie online. We're giving our response and interpretation of it.
And bands that have used a lot of historical references or used political statements, I mean, you look at Sabaton, which is power metal, you look at Ministry with what they've done, there's new metal bands, black metal bands, power metal bands, all with their sort of statements that they address. And with Wayfarer having such an experimental sound where you could tell, I would say every album from Children of an Iron Age to now has its own things that make it stand out. But why do you feel like that the music that we hear in Wayfarer was always the best means of expressing the message or the historical references?
I don't know. I can't speak to what's best or whatever. I just know this is like how we're driven to do it, like just seemed like something that needed to be made, if nothing else, then just for ourselves, something we wanted to see. And like we definitely, it's, I don't know, the tie to place, like it being this band so centered around the American West in Colorado, is something that's important to us. So like, I think a lot of these marquee European like black metal bands, for example, part of what makes them so special is like it's so centered around where they come from, whether it's like the history or the legend or mythology, whatever, that it wouldn't be the same if some band from Ohio did it. So like, that's, maybe I'm getting away from your question here, but like,
No,
in terms of why we express this, what's that?
You're making a good point. Keep going.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, like we want it to be genuine and true to where it's from. So like that's why we feel like we have to tell this story. It's like we have our own cultural thing to explore. We want to like represent that out in the world in this way, because that's the great thing about metal, is like as long as you do it in a genuine way, you can, tell any story, explore anything. I think you just have to like make sure you do it right and not like in a gimmick or half-ass kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, metal has no borders, and I will tattoo that on my forehead with how much I believe that, of course. But where you are from, makes such an impact on how people look at your band. Like European metal here is put on such a pedestal, and American
Hmm.
metal is put on a pedestal in Europe. But like there are bands that like, coming from New York City, a New York hardcore band, if this band like I couldn't picture a Sick of It All or an Agnostic Front coming from Denver and sounding like the way that they are. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And
Yeah, yeah.
and
It's something inherent in it.
yeah, and there's a band from North Carolina called Aether Realm. Maybe you've heard of them. I mean, they're really good, but they're from North Carolina, but they sound like they're from Sweden or Finland, and they
Mhm.
have T-shirts at their merch that says "We are not from Finland." It's almost kind of like a joke in a way. So the region in which it's from, I think, makes an impact. Like this is obviously a big what if, but let's say Wayfarer, same members, and all of you two knew each other, but let's say you originated in Arizona or Texas or Florida or something like that. There's no doubt in my mind your music would sound drastically different.
100%. Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that's what's cool about it because music is a cultural experience, you know. So like, it's just a true expression of humanity, and you know, one's experience is just shaped so much by your background and your upbringing and your surroundings that that's what makes it interesting, and that's why you know exactly like you said European bands maybe put on a pedestal here and vice versa over there. And it's because it's like more interesting to someone elsewhere because they don't necessarily know about it, you know? Um, and that's what makes it cool is like being able to take in these different cultural things. And yeah, I think the place of origin has a lot to do with that.
Yeah, yeah. Especially like I've always wanted to see like what a New York City hardcore show in Europe would look like because they're very interested in it there.
Yeah.
But they're playing that shit in Norway. I mean, people are going to be like, "What is this government, this evil tyranny in which you sing about? We don't have that here." Like, so. Um, but and a couple of other questions I have for you is because to me like the literature and the visual art and the historical references that you have for Wayfarer is awesome. But to me though, there is a difference between like that and inspiration to a degree. I guess is the best way to put it. Like there's your references that you seek out in a way, the knowledge that you seek, but then there's also creative energy and the impulse that drives one to create. So can that be sought out in a way the same way that you seek out historical references? Can you find that creative energy or obtain that, or does that just have to strike you?
I think it has to strike you. You know, I think if you're looking for it, it's never gonna go the same. You know, like I don't know. We're still at least in the phases of our lives where we're like driven to do these things, and if it ever got to a point where we're more like, oh, we're doing this because we have to make an album or something, I think that's where bands fall off a lot of the time because yeah, I think it has to be organic. Like you have to be driven to express something to like really do it right. You know, like things can be made. You can figure out. It's like okay, I know these scales and these sorts of things that the band does, so I can like construct a song in that kind of way. But to do anything real, I mean, like to me, the most important thing in music is to do something that will like last. You know, that isn't just a flash in the pan, a trend or whatever. Because all of my favorite bands are usually something off center about them. You know, they're not easily categorized into one genre or another, and most of them, because of that, had didn't enjoy immediate like seismic success. It took a long time for people to like catch up to it, and then maybe eventually they were considered legendary, maybe not in some cases. But I think that that to me is the most important thing, to do something that's like real and unique to where when all these like trends in the underground or beyond come and go, it will be something that stands the test of time because it was a real expression. So getting back to the root of your question, it's like I think that has to come from a place of like truly wanting and needing to make something. So it's like if you're having to search for that inspiration, then that's probably not the time to be making something,
Fair
in
enough.
my opinion.
Fair enough. Because I think that there's also a fine like argument, and I agree with you. But like some people would say, like I had a tattoo artist once say that if I only tattooed when I was inspired, I wouldn't pay my rent. You know what I mean? So like,
Right. And
so
that's the difference of, of when it becomes like your livelihood. You know, you do have to approach it more something like that. And especially like tattooing is a bit different because it's client work, right? Where it's like people are coming to you being like, I want this and this, and like maybe you're like, oh, that's cool, I have an idea. Maybe you're like, that's stupid, but
I'll
it's
take
going to cost you this much money, and I need to pay my bills, so let's do it. And that's the thing with the band is like, we're at this level of band, we're in this gray area of it's like it is a part of our actual income and life plan, but it's still a weird subsect of extreme metal, so we're not stupid enough to be like putting all of our eggs in this basket, everything better work out. So we don't have to do anything right now. We choose to do it because we want to, and then try to figure out the kind of logistical financial side of it after the fact, being like, okay, this is how much of whatever we can depend on this for. But yeah, I think that is often what makes that difference for people, is when it becomes this thing like, you look at bands like, I don't know, Slayer or something that is touring after all these years, and like it might be easy to take the perspective of being like, oh, they should just hang it up. It's not the same band, they don't have the same energy, because that's to a point that I think that's true. But at the same time, it's like, well, this is their livelihood. Like, what else are they going to do? They're in their however age, like just start a new entry level job. Like, is that what you do?
Yeah.
So I do, I understand that position. I'm just lucky enough to not be there now, where right now it's creativity for creativity's sake, and we're hoping to always have some autonomy over that. But
yeah,
sometimes people get to the point where it's like, this is what they do, they got to pay the bills, is what it is.
become a paramedic, like what Josh from Typo Negative did.
See, there you go.
Yep, if you get into an accident, if you get shot in East New York, there's a chance that Josh from Typo could come to save you.
Almost worth the roll of the dice.
Nah, you never been to that neck of the woods. And a few more questions I have for you. One is next year being 10 years of Children of an Iron Age, the 10-year anniversary that many people heard of Wayfarer. And I'm just wondering, could there be some potential celebration for that next year with 2024 around the corner? And how did that dictate the direction of Old Souls and World's Blood and onwards? Was that, being that is the debut, it has a nice debut charm, as I call to it, in a way. But do you think did you think you sort of like found out who Wayfarer was with your first one, being that you have your whole first life to make your first record? Or did you, with the making of Old Souls, you look back at, let's not do that again?
Yeah, definitely a bit of both. To answer the first part of your question, next year being 10 years and all that, we don't really have plans. We're always so fixated on what we're doing now that it's hard to, shift focus to like something we feel like we already covered. So like for us, it's like American Gothic is coming out in October. Next year is all about bringing that record to life in a live setting. Like, I think for us, or at least for myself, it always kind of happens like this, where it's like you put so much thought and energy and emotion into making a record that it's only when you get to like tour on it and bring it to life on stage that you feel like it really got to like, be completed. Like you think about it and you write it and you put all this into it and it gets recorded, but it doesn't feel like you get to put the stamp on like, okay, that we did it, we told that story, until you really like do the cycle of playing it live. So we're 100% in that realm right now, letting American Gothic like fully exist and flourish. But we did I guess it was this spring, we did Roadburn, and we did half of the set was actually debuting stuff from American Gothic for the first time, and half of it was a retrospective set based around the 10-year anniversary. So we actually played some Iron Age material for the first time in I don't know how long, a lot of years. And it was interesting to dive back in, because I don't know, to me, like there are things I appreciate about it. But to me, I just see the youth of it all, which, like you said, there is like a certain charm. But from a more critical standpoint of being a part of making the music, I more just see, like, for one, it's too fucking long. That thing's like 70 minutes and it has no business being that long. And just little things like that it's like, that is totally something that happened because, we were this old, and like I started writing half that record before a lot of the other guys were even in it. So it has that kind of like one man band syndrome in ways where it's like there's nobody to keep you in check, so you do end up writing 70 minutes of shit.
And you were drumming for the band at that time too, right?
What's that?
You were drumming for the band too at that time.
Oh
too.
no, not at all.
Oh,
I've
really?
never been able to drum. And like it's mostly the lineup did play on the album, but since that kind of happened through the formation of the band, like there was first a demo, which was myself and the other original founding guitarist, and actually Joey, who plays guitar now in the band, just like laid down bass on the demo and helped us mix it. But that was stuff that we were just writing, the two of us, and like programming drums. And so Iron Age was like half of it was written in that way, and then Isaac and James joined and like brought a lot of their stuff to it, and they did play bass and drums, and Jamie did some vocals on the album. But yeah, it's such a formative album, like that. I don't know. To me, it was a time and a place. Like it had to happen. Like we had to make that to get where we are now. And I'm not saying it's like bad or it's trash. It's just like it's hard for me to listen to as music. I just see my 19-year-old self and us all as young people and everything that I have learned or at least decided since then. But I don't know. And also I will say, I think it'd be weird to do like a 10-year anniversary because nobody fucking cared when that album came out. Like there wasn't a lot of promotion behind it. We were on a different label at the time.
Now they do though. Every band who's had their debut ignored, I've told bands, mark my words, your debut will be unequivocally your best record when your band takes off, because that's what everybody's gonna say. I bet you people are gonna say like, oh man, I want you to play more of Children of an Iron Age. That you've been chasing that record ever since.
For sure. We've definitely run into like more of a surge in interest in that stuff. And yeah, it's so ironic because it's like back then we were like touring and like literally trying to find anyone to care that we existed, and it's so funny now where people are like, oh, why can't I get this record? Why don't you play that? And I was like, where were you when this was happening? But I get it. It's like people find stuff when they find it. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Like I'm sure there's some level of interest, but we're not about to do any big retrospective thing. I hope there are people that enjoy that record and the second record. And I still stand by them. Like they were important parts of our trajectory, and like there are things about it that I think were cool, but we're just not in that headspace anymore, or at least right now. Maybe when we're like old and like 30 years in, we're like, okay, let's dig out the old stuff. But right now we're just too obsessed with what's going on currently to backtrack.
This new album I consider to be Wayfarer's best work, so I can't wait to hear this new material. And the final question I wanted to ask you is, if you have time for one more question, is with this trilogy aspect of World's Bloods, Romance and Violence, and American Gothic, because when you do play live, you can't play American Gothic. You're obviously, I mean, I'm not to assume, but you're probably not going to be playing American Gothic front to back for the entire set. You got to bring some stuff off of Romance and World's Blood and whatnot. So when you kind of shuffle your set lists a bit and go forward and backwards and do an American Gothic song, then maybe bring out an Old Souls song, do you think that maybe sort of changes the narrative of the trilogy in a way?
Yeah, and I guess I want to be careful about the trilogy thing to a point, because it's not officially a trilogy. It was never like planned to be one. I just think that those are like conceptually there is a through line where they could be viewed that way. But yeah, and I think that's important as a band too, because like I just went on this whole diatribe about being obsessed with the current album, but I think as a fan of music, and when I go to see bands, I always want to see things from different eras represented in a set, because the band may be caught up in the one thing, but maybe X album is what got you into it, and like hearing something like that would be big. And so yeah, we definitely do like to figure out what sets, like what to bring in sets from whatever various albums, and in what way that would like make sense in a set, but also like cover all this ground. And also I think it's like probably healthy for us too to like remember what the band was doing at different points, and yeah, just give like kind of a more well-rounded live show. I think we do want to do maybe one or two specific shows where we do play the full album back to back. Actually, we did that with Romance in New York and in Denver, kind of because it came out in the middle of the pandemic. So it was early 2022 when we finally started really doing live stuff. And we did the one show in Brooklyn and the one show in Denver where we played all of Romance of Violence front to back. And so we may do something like that with American Gothic, but it'll be a more specific show. But beyond that, yeah, we're definitely gonna cover some ground from the other albums, and that's fun too.
Hell yeah. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time and for such an awesome conversation. And most of all, thank you for an amazing album. Just anything else you'd like to plug for Wayfarer for the near future, if you are allowed to say.
No, man. I mean, thank you for the time. This is like actually felt like a good human conversation, which I appreciate. Not all interviews are like that.
No.
So thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, just look for live actions. That's the next step. And I will say we have nearly set plans to be in New York by the end of the year. So we will be up there, and I would hope to see you there.
Hell yeah, you'll definitely see me there. Thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Wayfarer, American Gothic, coming out this October. Be sure to pick that up. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, man. Cheers.